Good morning, the Way Forward Conference. It's a real pleasure to be here. Krakow and the Way Forward Conference hold a special place in my heart. I was introduced as an Avanade executive, but up until about 2 weeks ago, I was the president of a company called Infusion. And so some of you guys may know, Infusion set up an office in Krakow about 6.5 years ago. So I made my first trip to Krakow about 7 years ago. And you know, based on that trip, we invested a big part of our business in Krakow, and we set out on a journey to build a fairly significant presence in Poland. And like any other new business venture that you set up, I expected in Poland that when we set up, we would have some bumps along the way. So my plans for the business in year one were fairly modest. We wrapped up year one, and when we looked back, everything that we had done in Krakow had gone off flawlessly. It had gone off without a hitch. Every project that we had done in Krakow went well. We had surpassed all of our hiring expectations, and so things were going really well. And so we continued to invest in the market. And a couple of years into our journey into Krakow, we were probably, I don't know, 40, 50 people in Krakow. And I started to get concerned. And my concern was we had hired this phenomenal crew of people in Krakow to start the office. And as we succeeded, they called their friends. And we grew the office. And as we continued to succeed, they called their friends. And the office, you know, kind of grew that way. And I was sitting with our management team, and I was saying to them, look, I'm really worried. Like, you know, our team, they don't have any more friends. They all already work at Infusion. Like, and this is becoming a core part of our strategy. How are we going to scale out this business? How are we going to access the broader talent in the market? Because we were still virtually unknown in the Krakow market. So I live in Toronto, and I was getting ready for a trip to visit the Poland office, and I'm sitting back with my North American management team, and I'm sitting back and I'm saying, okay, you know what, I've got a great idea, and I'm really excited to go to Poland and share this with the Krakow team. I think I know how we're going to scale our presence in the market. And for as wonderful as Infusion is as a company, or was as a company, we were always very stingy with marketing dollars. We never spent a lot on marketing. And so I sat with my management team, and the big trend in North America was for companies to invest money in PR and marketing agents around employee branding. So I sat down and I said, hey, I'm going to go to Krakow and I'm going to share with the team that we're coming with budget and money for them to spend on a marketing campaign, and we'll hire a local marketing company and they can do their thing. We can put billboards up about Infusion, we can get in local publications, and that's how we'll build our employee brand in Poland. So I was really excited to visit Krakow you know, on that trip. And so I arrive at the Krakow office, and I sit down with my Krakow management team, and I'm really excited. Like, I'm at the edge of my chair. You know, I think they're going to be excited to hear my idea. I'm like, guys, you know what? We've been talking a lot about how we scale this office. I just want to share my idea with you. You know, we're going to give you a budget of, I can't remember what the dollar amount was, but let's say it was $20,000. We're going to give you $20,000. You know, we found a PR company that specializes in employee branding. We're going to make this investment in your business. And you know, that's how we're going to get known in the Poland market. And they just kind of looked at me. No one smiled, and no one seemed excited by my what I thought was generous investment in the business. And you know, I love the Polish people. I'm from North America, but as a North American coming here, you guys are mercilessly blunt in your feedback when people share ideas. And so you guys just, the team just kind of shook their head and said, no, we don't like that idea, Alim. And I was like, what do you mean you don't like that idea? And I thought they were going to ask me for more money. And they said, no, we have a different idea. We would like to create a conference. And I was like, really? And they're like, yeah, the way we're gonna get out and get to know the development market in Krakow and in the market is we're going to create a conference that's geared towards the type of work and the type of people that Infusion hires. And they said, yeah, you know what, we're doing a lot of interactive design and development, and we're blending that with more traditional development, and not a lot of people, that takes a special skill, and there's no one speaks to that in the market. And so as they're explaining this idea to me, I'm like, a conference, like, I don't get it. Like, that's not going to work. Like, from scratch, we're going to start a conference. That's not going to work fast enough. That's not going to have the impact and everything else. But the team was so passionate about it that at the end of the meeting, and I said, okay, well, how much budget do you need? And they said, well, you can keep your $20,000. Give us 5. And I was like, really? Like, you know, you just need $5,000? And so I left the meeting, I'm like, okay, if they're really that passionate about it, and all they need is $5,000, fine, they can have their $5,000, we'll try it. And I was like, but we'll still do the employee branding thing. And they're like, no, we don't want to do that. We just want to do the conference. So I went back to my hotel that night, and I was just, on the one hand, very skeptical of how a conference would work and would we be able to pull it off. But on the other hand, I was like, just like, these guys were really passionate. They were sure of themselves and everything. And so I came back the next day and I said, hey, can we meet again? Tell me more about this conference. And when are we gonna do our planning, and how are we gonna do the marketing? And they kind of looked at me and they said, we? They said, no, Alim, like, this is our conference. And I was like, wait, no, like Infusion's conference, right? And they said, no, this is the Way Forward conference that we'd like to create. And I was like, okay, but it's gonna be Infusion, like the Way Forward conference brought to you by Infusion. And they said, no, that's not really what we had in mind. And I was like, okay, so you want me to not invest in marketing around the company, you want me to fund a conference, and you don't want to call it Infusion, and you don't want me to have input in, you know, kind of editorializing it? And they're like, yes, exactly. And I was like, okay, like, explain this to me, explain how it works. And they had this philosophy. They said, look, we want to create a conference, we think it'll benefit Infusion, but we think it's going to benefit the development community in Krakow, and that will in turn have benefit for Infusion, but also for other companies and for the developers in the market. And it will bring like-minded people together in this market who will then attract other like-minded people. And we're going to create something special in the market that will turn Krakow and Poland to the center of, it'll leverage the talent that's coming out of the universities, and it's going to create a special community here. And Alim, you being one of the sponsors and being a member of the ecosystem that's like-minded, you'll see the derivative benefit of that. And it took me a sec. It actually took me probably a year or so to get comfortable with that concept. But I said, okay, go for it, try it. And so 4 years ago, the team started the Way Forward conference. And as much as I'd like to claim it as my success or Infusion's success, it's really been something that we've been a sponsor of and we've allowed to happen arm's length. And so coming here today and seeing this audience, of seeing the other activities that happen throughout the year and the goodness that's come of that, it's inspirational to me, and our business has benefited from it. So is our competitors' business. I noticed one of the other sponsors is one of our competitors in the market. But it's created a lot of goodness in the market, and it's created a fertile ground for us to find talent, other people to find talent, credibility for our clients. So it's a great pleasure for me to come over here. I'm going to spend a lot of my time today sharing my journey, sharing the journey of Infusion over the past 17 years. And we built a $100 million company. And I want to share some of the stories and the lessons that I've picked up along the way. But I think as you learn more about Infusion, and if we talk offline, you'll hear that the story of Infusion is filled with lots of little stories like the Way Forward conference. Things that we tried because people were passionate about it. Not all of them worked, and that's okay. Not all of them were my ideas, most of them weren't. Some of them were things I didn't think would necessarily work, but we showed faith in anyways. And so the first lesson that one of the big themes that I picked up throughout my journey, but one of the themes that you'll hear recurring through my talk is, I think one of the key factors to our success was that myself as a leader and our leadership team, we had an open mind. We tried new things. We tried things that didn't necessarily resonate. We were open to being wrong. We were open to, the reality is I had no idea how to create an employee brand in Poland. So maybe I had a preconceived notion, but just because I was the president of the company didn't mean my preconceived notion was the right one. And if someone else felt a little more passionate about their idea and had thought it out a little bit more, why not try theirs? And so it's with great pride that I'm here speaking at the Way Forward conference. If there's any evidence that it is an arm's length conference, it's taken me 4 years to get an invitation to speak here, despite the fact that that Infusion was one of the founders. But so I wanted to kick off with that. Some of you may know, and some of you may know this, but my company, Infusion, was sold to Avanade about 6 months ago. And for those of you that don't know, because Avanade is now new into the Polish market, Avanade is a joint venture between Accenture and Microsoft. So it's a joint venture between one of the world's largest technology companies and I think one of the world's largest professional services company. And it was created, you know, about 16, 17 years ago, I think in 2000, and its goal is to be one of the leading digital companies helping bring solutions to market on the Microsoft platform. So we were acquired by Avanade at the end of, I think, February 27th, so about 6 months ago. And at the time of our acquisition, Infusion was around a $100 million company. We had offices in 7 different countries. We had about 700 employees worldwide. And at the time, and to this day, we were probably one of the, if not the leading thought leader in building capital markets trading systems. We were probably one of the leading digital transformation companies in the market. We were this, not niche, not small, but not huge, this medium size, so we could scale, but we had innovation at our core that was tapped on by some of the world's largest companies to do pretty transformative work for their organizations. We're an organization where our culture had won awards. We had been, you know, year over year named Most Admired Culture in Toronto. Our executives had won awards. Our solutions had won awards. So we'd built a very special company, you know, over that time. Now, as the person who was involved running the business, I joined the company, as Justina said in the intro, as an intern when it was 5 people in 2000. So the 17 years that we were building the company was really a sprint. It wasn't a journey that was kind of smooth and nice where we took long pauses and you know, strategically planned and looked at things. It was a sprint. It felt like we ran from one opportunity to the next and one challenge to the next. And during that 17 years, there wasn't a lot of time for reflection. We were learning on the fly. Everything that we did, every challenge that we did, was something we were doing for the first time. So we spent a lot of time during that 17 years focusing on what we were doing wrong. So if you pulled me aside at any given time, it was much easier for me to list to you the reasons why Infusion sucked versus the reasons why we were great. So, you know, I could tell you at any given time the clients that we're having challenges with, the employees that weren't happy with us, the projects that had overages. I could tell you all of that. But if you were to say to me, hey, Alim, why are you great? I'd be like, come talk to me later, like I'm fixing these things over here. So upon selling the company, you know, 17 years later, a lot of people have come and said, wow, Alim, like you and your team, you built a $100 million company. It did all these wonderful things. Like, what made it possible? And for the first time, 17 years in, looking back, I've been forced to go through this journey where it's like, hey, what did we actually do right? What were the choices that we made along the way? What were the conscious decisions that we made? What were the mistakes that we avoided? Or what were the mistakes we made and we corrected that allowed us to build this really special company that, you know, like I said, has offices around the world, but produces people and things that create things like the Way Forward conference. And it's been especially important, that journey's been especially important, and that reflection's been especially important as we've come together with Avanade. Because a lot of what the last 6 months with Avanade has been me having to articulate to Avanade what makes Infusion special so that it's preserved and it can grow within their business. So today's talk, what I thought I would do is I would share with you my journey. I'd tell a few stories about how we built our business along the way, and I'd share with you some of the lessons that I took from that. So I joined Infusion as a co-op student. So I went to a university called the University of Waterloo. Have any of you guys heard of the University of Waterloo? A couple guys from Infusion maybe. The University of Waterloo is a school in Canada. It's probably the best known engineering school in Canada. And what's special about the University of Waterloo is they're known for their internship program, their co-op program. When you do a degree, you take 5 years to do it instead of 4, and you spend four months in school and then you work for 4 months. 4 months in school and you work for 4 months. And I went to school from 1996 to 2001. And for those of you guys that are old enough to remember that time, that was basically the years of the dot-com boom. So even though we were students and we were interns, we were treated like rock stars, right? Like we'd go, it would be internship time, and like people would be flying you to different places and buying you big dinners, and you know, you it was like being a beautiful girl at a dance. Everybody wanted to dance with you. And so my roommate at the time, he had spent one of his work terms working at a company in New York. We were all in Toronto, and so if you're a student and you get to go to New York, it's a pretty cool experience. And he came back from that work term, and when he was telling me about it, he told me how amazing of a place New York was. But when I asked him about the job and the company he worked with, he was like, yeah, it was okay. But he kept going on about this guy that he had met at this workplace. He'd worked at this company, and he's like, yeah, and when I was there, I met this guy, and he was really great, and he was like this amazing coder, but he was also a great speaker, and he had all this energy and this and that. And I was like, okay, enough about this guy. And this guy, his name was Greg Brill. And Sheldon, my roommate at the time, and I think Sheldon, if you've spoke at the Way Forward conference last year or the year before, he was just blown away by this guy, Greg Brill. And over the next couple of years, Sheldon kept in touch with Greg. And towards the end of our university degree, Sheldon had come to me and he's like, listen, Alim, before we graduate, we have to go and do a co-op term in New York together. We have to it's so much fun, it's a life experience, it'd be great to have. So Sheldon had been in touch with Greg, and Greg went to Sheldon and said, hey, Sheldon, you know what? I just started my own company. It's called Infusion. Why don't if you're interested in doing a co-op term, why don't you come down and we'll do something together? And so Sheldon said, oh yeah, by the way, I've got a roommate. His name is Alim. Can he come too? And Greg was kind of like, yeah, why not? It was an era where if you could code, you had a job. So Sheldon and I packed up, my 1992 Volkswagen Jetta, and we drove from Waterloo, which is just outside of Toronto, down to New York, and we showed up to New York. And we were now, towards the end of our university career. So we'd now worked at 3 or 4 or 5 different companies along the way. And we pulled up to Infusion, which was in Hoboken, New Jersey. And we walked into this office, regular office. But the experience we had in that first month working from Infusion was different than any other place we'd worked before. It was a small company, 5 or 6 people. And we were doing work. We had 2 things going on. We were doing work for Lehman Brothers. We were helping Lehman Brothers build trading systems. And at the same time, as part of an effort to build the brand, Greg was writing a book. And what blew us away about this company was it was 5 or 6 people, but it walked with a confidence of a company that was 200 people. And from day one, we were not treated as students. We were not treated as interns. We were not treated as new graduates even. We were treated as partners in the business. Every week we'd have a business meeting. Everybody would meet in the office. We'd sit around the table, and everything was talked about transparently. Project challenges were talked about transparently. Partnership challenges were talked about transparently. Sales challenges, money challenges. It was just all talked openly. And if you had an idea, we talked about it, and it was a valid idea. And so we spent kind of 3 months just really enthralled by this place. And the other big thing that was really significant about Infusion was we would go after things that we had no right going after. Greg had this attitude that I think still holds today. He was saying, hey, what these big companies have problems that they need solved, they're not that hard. If you're willing to work hard and you're smart, they're not that hard. The managers that are in charge of those opportunities or the consulting companies they bring in, they overcomplicate the solutions to those ideas to protect their fiefdoms, right? So if we can go in and we can outthink an idea, and it doesn't matter if you have 20 years of experience or if you're just out of school, if you're just willing to be smart and you can come with a solution that's an order of magnitude easier, we will win the business. And that was our attitude. We would go in and we had a thesis that the market overvalued experience at the expense of attitude and aptitude, right? So you'd get experience over time and you'd use that experience to build walls. And so we just had this boldness. And so this was a really special company that we'd started working for. And 2 months into the co-op term, the co-op terms were 4 months, Greg sat down with Sheldon and I and he said, hey, you know what, I've really enjoyed working with you. Why don't you guys come and work for me full time? We still had a year of school left. And he's like, look, you can either quit school and come and work for me now, or finish school and come work for me when you're done. And Sheldon and I, didn't even have to look at each other. We looked at Greg and we basically said, listen, it's been wonderful here, but no thank you. And he's like, what do you mean no thank you? And we said, look, 2 things. One, as much as we've loved working here, we're going to start our own business, right? During that time, it was the dot-com boom. Everybody was going to start their own business and be a billionaire. We were no different. We're going to start our own business when we graduate. And two, we actually want to be based in Canada. As much as we've loved coming to New York, we're both Canadian. Sheldon had family in Canada. My girlfriend, now wife, was in Canada. And so that really should have been the end of that, right? That, we should have finished our term and moved on our way. What happened next was probably the singular thing that framed my attitude towards business. On the last day of our co-op term, Greg and his wife Deborah called us into their office, and they said, "Listen, we have an idea for you that we'd like to pursue. We think you guys should pursue. You guys have talked about starting your own business. Why don't you start your own business now?" And we're like, "Okay, go home, incorporate a company. We will be your first client. We have extra work that we can't find people to do. We'd like to send it to you, and we'd like to work for you." Now, it doesn't sound that crazy, but the reality is we talked about doing overflow work for them during our school year anyways, and we would have done it for free pizza. When you're a student, hey, if they'd ordered us a pizza every time we did work, that would have been easy. Or we'd have done it for very, very small wages. But they said, "No, we want you to set up a company, and we're going to treat you like we're going to pay you proper rates and everything else." And so Sheldon and I incorporated our own company, and over the next 4 or 5 months, or over the next year actually, Infusion was one of our clients, and we started a business. And what Greg and Deborah said to us is, they said, "Listen, the reason we're doing this is twofold. One, we'd like to find a way to keep working with you, and maybe this creates a path for us to work together in the future. And two, you've been really good to us, and if for nothing else, if all we've done is helped you get off to your start, we think you're going to be successful. So we're happy to have just done that." And so over the next year, we continued to work with Infusion, and we ran our company. It was called S Squared Solutions. And during that time, during our last year of school, the dot-com bubble burst, and things started kind of fizzling out. And the prospect all of a sudden of running our own business started becoming a little bit daunting. But Infusion's business kept growing and kept doing well. And so sometime during that last year, Greg sat down with us and he said, "Listen, I really like what we're doing together. Why don't we start a business together in Canada? Why don't we start Infusion Canada together? You can be my partners. We'll build a Canadian business. You've always been passionate about doing business in Canada. And I've always been passionate about working with you guys, and I think we share the same values." And so out of school, Sheldon and myself and a couple of our classmates started a business called Infusion Canada, and it was a partnership with main Infusion, which at the time wasn't that big. It was 10 or 20 people. But we started this Infusion company. And the vision that we had for that business was very different than what ended up happening. We thought Infusion Canada would almost be like a franchise. We thought that it would run independently. We thought we would sell to the Canadian banks. We thought we'd be up and running in no time. It took us 2 years before we closed our first deal in Canada. And that's a whole other series of talks about learning how to sell and everything. The reality was we were 22 years old, and as smart and as slick as we thought we were, when we'd walk into a meeting, we looked like we were 22 years old. Our suits looked like they were our dad's suits, and it took us a while to learn to refine ourselves. The Canadian market at the time wasn't quite as open and innovative as the US market, but during that 2 years, the direction of the business, it took a different path than we thought. So we ended up building a business that, instead of being a Canadian franchise, ended up being a Canadian nearshoring center for our New York office. So the biggest challenge in New York was getting talent. We'd fly to New York every Monday, and we would work with the banks, and we'd win projects, and we'd bring them up, and we built a team in Canada to do the work. So that's kind of how my career at Infusion started. And a year into that, I got to know Greg, I got to know his wife, Deborah. And I think, actually, Greg has spoken at the Way Forward conference, and if you saw Greg, you'd remember him. Very charismatic, brilliant entrepreneur, pure technologist, not a guy who has any passion for running a business day to day. And so very early on, Greg came to me, and I was 22, 23, and he said, "Hey, Alim, you really have a passion for business. You really seem to love this. You really seem to thrive at it." He's like, "I want you to run Infusion." And I'd be like, yeah, that would be great one day. And he's like, "No, I want you to run Infusion now." And so about a year in, he passed the keys of the company over to me. He supported me. He gave me the support network. His wife gave me the support network. And, it's been a great journey since. And so when I talk a little bit about that early story, what stuck with me was not anything that I did, but how I was treated. So I think I'm a pretty smart guy, but so is everybody else that graduated from the University of Waterloo. Maybe there's some things I was a little bit better at and some things that I was worse at. But what Greg did is he took a smart person and he turned them into a partner, right? From day one, Greg had this ability to find talent, figure out what they could do that he couldn't do, and motivate them and turn them into partners. And I looked over the next 17 years, but especially over the next 2 or 3 years in those early days, how hard I worked to build that business. I looked at how much I learned during that time. And if you look back and you look at what motivated me, I think if I'd taken a job at IBM, I would have worked a third as hard and I would have learned a quarter as much. If I look at what motivated me, it was that Greg had tapped into my passion, which was I wanted to build and run a business, and that you know, he gave me that opportunity. He made me work for it, right? You know, that what I lacked in experience, I made up for in sweat hours. But it created a real alignment that benefited me, but it also benefited his company. And so when I looked at myself and I looked, how am I going to scale this business? I remember there was this one time where a couple years in, I was working 16 hours a day, and I felt like the business just couldn't grow any more unless I could put an extra hour or two into work. And I remember sitting with Greg's wife, Deborah, and saying, hey, like you know, I'm working really hard and this and that. And she's like, listen, like, Alim, good for you for working hard, but you've got to figure out how to get people to work for you the way you're working for us. And it really struck with me, and I looked at how I was treated by Greg, and I said, that's going to be the philosophy that's going to allow us to scale our business. So, you know, the lessons that I would say, you know, the Infusion lessons, if you want to take them from that first story, I learned that attitude and aptitude is what you need to look at in people. Experience is important, but, you know, Greg used to always say this. He's like, there's 3 things that define a person as a professional: their attitude, their aptitude, and their experience. There's only one of those things that's changeable, right? The only thing that's changeable that increases over time is experience. I'm sorry, you're either smart or you're dumb. There's nothing anybody can do to change that. By the time you enter the professional workforce, you've been formed enough, and you're either intelligent at the things you need to do or you're not. Not that you can't learn, but it's innate in you. You either have a good attitude or you don't. There's very little a workplace can do to change that. Your experience, that can change. So if you hire for those first 2, the third one will build over time, and you can compensate for that third one. So that was an important first lesson. So find people with great attitude and aptitude, and as much as you can, treat them like partners. And treat them like partners means listening to them, giving them opportunity, but it also means putting the responsibility on them. Let them work hard. Let them hustle. Let them take the burden on, right? And you get the benefit of that. That was lesson number 1. Lesson number 2, walk with swagger, be bold, and be subversive. We always viewed ourselves going into every deal that we were going after when we were trying to win deals. Win deals, win candidates. We had a chip on our shoulder. We were the David fighting the Goliath, right? If we were bidding against IBM, we were going to find we wanted that deal more than anything else. Not to win the business, we wanted to knock Goliath down, right? That was what motivated us. And we would find angles and ways, and we would outwork it. And I think, especially as you grow, and especially as we became a $100 million company, and I'm very cognizant of this now that I'm part of the Avanade family, how do you find that chip on your shoulder? Because if you don't have that chip on your shoulder, you end up being lackadaisical, and you end up losing to the little new Infusion that does have that chip on your shoulder. So those are a couple of the early lessons that I learned. Over the years, we built our business, we scaled the business up, we continued to do work for investment banks. Lehman was our first client, then we did work for Credit Suisse, then we did work for Citigroup, but we also started building other parts of our business. We did work for pharma, we did work for government, we started doing work for a lot of big organizations. One of the things that distinguished our business from our competitors was we were always a firm that, although we understood the back-end pieces and we could write really performant code and software, we always had a care about the aesthetics of the software. We had this belief that the way you engage your business users is through great UI and design. So as a software company, as a software solutions company, we built very nice, very strong user experiences. And that was one of the things that defined us in the market. But about 7, 8, 9 years ago, the market started changing. A different kind of firm started encroaching on our space. We started bumping into companies that at the time were called agencies, right? So we started bumping into firms that had traditionally done advertising and everything. We're starting to move it more into interactive design, and we're starting to bump into these companies. And for a while, we'd pitch against these companies, and we'd see their work outputs from the proposals, and we'd be enthralled by them. And we walked away from some of those initial pitches, and we said, we have to be that. We have to build and develop that capability. We're inclined to it, but wow, like there's a discipline around that. We want that, and we want to build that into our business. So probably around 2006, 2007, we made a decision that we were going to start pivoting our business and do more experiential design. And around that time, a technology came out called Microsoft Surface. Not the Surface laptop, but it was like the tabletop coffee table. Does anybody remember that? Yeah, right? So I know now we look at that and we laugh at that piece and it belongs in a museum, but at the time it was pretty freaking cool, right? Like that was before the iPad was out. It was like this big multi-touch device and everything, and it cost $15,000 to buy one of those devices. And if you remember when it came out, every single Microsoft partner wanted to become a Surface partner. And Microsoft opened the program and they said, we're going to accept 5 partners, that we're going to train how to use this, that are going to be authorized to build solutions. Because what Microsoft didn't want is they didn't want crappy apps being built for it. They wanted to control the experience of what was coming out. So I remember sitting back and saying to our partnership person, saying, we have to get into that program. We have to become one of those partners. And she worked her magic in her network and our connections and this and that, and we got admitted to the Microsoft Surface program. Which meant that we had to send 2 or 3 of our team members to Redmond for like a month of deep down Surface experience where we were going to build applications on Surface. So we went to Redmond, our team did their thing, and I remember visiting, I went to visit our team, and we got to see a showcase of all the apps that everybody had built. And I don't think I would have admitted this at the time, but ours were the shittiest of the 5. The other companies there, they had slick designs, beautiful apps, and everything else. And we were kind of like the dumb kid in the class, right? Like we were the ones that I don't think I'd have acknowledged that at the time, but we were the ones where we needed the most help. And I remember meeting with the general manager of the group, and like we definitely were not his favorite, but we got to know him over time. And I remember looking at the work we were doing and saying, hey, we need to fix this. And we went out and we hired the best creative director that was available on the market. And we said, hey, we're not going to be able to fix this ourselves. We have to bring in outside talent. We hired this gentleman by the name of Peter Rivera, who's absolutely brilliant. We'd hired him. He used to run a lot of the creative at AOL. And we brought him in, and our work started getting better, and our creative started getting better, and this and that. But what I learned was, as I got to know the general manager of the Surface Group, I learned that as much as they cared about user experience, that's not really what they cared about. It was Microsoft's second venture into hardware. Xbox was kind of their first one. And at the end of the day, he needed to sell these. He needed to sell these $15,000 devices. And his biggest problem was, how am I going to get customers to buy these? And Microsoft doesn't have a hardware sales channel. And so he was starting to kind of probe around the partners and saying, hey, like, it's great that you guys can design nice interfaces, but are you guys willing to buy these devices and resell them for us? And all the companies were like, you're kind of like, whoa, not me, buddy. Like, talk to the next guy. And I remember engaging with him and saying, hey, like, so you want partners to buy these, and we can charge a markup and we can sell them. And I was like, okay, like, how much would this cost? And so he's walking us through the model and the margins and this and that. And we weren't that big of a company at the time. We went back and we came up with a plan to buy 1,000 devices, $10 million. We came up with a proposal to borrow the money and to do whatever. And we sat down with him and we said, okay, we want to put some skin in the game. And we were not one other partner offered to buy 1 device. And we came with a proposal to buy 1,000 devices. It changed the whole dynamic of the conversation. Within 3 months, our user experiences were as good as the next guy's, right? And the next guy didn't have any connections with corporations. He was building a DJ app and, you know, was very consumer facing. So we had relationships with the biggest hotels, we had relationships with the biggest banks. We had all this enterprise experience, and we'd started connecting the Surface team with these people on the ground. And on top of that, we were willing to put skin in the game. And it changed the dynamic of our partnership with Microsoft. It changed the dynamic of everything else. Thank God the Surface general manager said, hey, don't do 1,000, do 100. Because if he had said 1,000, I don't know if I'd be standing on stage, you know, right now. We ended up taking inventory of 100. We actually, another story for another talk, he actually gave us exclusive rights to sell it in Dubai as well, which was interesting. But it changed our dynamic, and by the end of the next year, we were the #1 Surface development partner in the world, which right now doesn't seem like a big acclaim, but it pivoted our whole business. We created an agency off of it, and we became one of Microsoft's leading partners, I would say the leading partner, selling advanced multi-touch user experiences in the enterprise. And it really built our name, and we were able to go from being a software development shop to a design shop, and it took us forward. So a couple of the lessons that I took away from that. One is, don't be afraid to pivot your business, even if it's to something you don't know. If you're right now running a business and all of a sudden, you know, you think there's a market in AI, but you don't know the first thing about AI, that's the easy part. You can go and hire an expert. You can learn. We're all smart people. We can pivot and learn something new and build new capabilities. That's not the hard part. That's sometimes the part that scares us. I don't know a lot about Bitcoin or blockchain, but if that's where I want to pivot my business, I shouldn't be scared by that. That's the easy part. We were the worst designers in the room. By the end of the 3 or 4 months, we were the best designers in the room. We went and we learned, we opened our mind, we changed our process, we hired great talent. That's the easy part. What I learned to value was the things that maybe I was taking for granted. So the relationships that we had a lot of, compared to any of those other 4 or 5 firms in there, we had relationships with banks, we had relationships with hotels, we had a history of people trusting us and buying from us. So a big part of what we did was we connected nodes in our network. So the next thing I learned was, you want to add value to any situation, one of the most valuable things you can do is connect your networks together. So we got a lot of credibility with Microsoft by introducing them to possible buyers of their solutions. And then the final lesson I would say is, hey, whenever you're working with a stakeholder, think less about me and think more about them. Right? So when you really listened in the room, yeah, they were annoyed that our user experiences weren't better, and, you know, et cetera, et cetera. But at the end of the day, when we really listened and we asked them what their real problems were, it was that they were trying to figure out how to unload hardware. And if we could help them drive that, it changed the whole dynamic of the conversation. So I thought that was an interesting pivotal part of our business. The final story I'll share with you is actually very relevant to some of the, to this room. I want to tell you about the story of how Infusion went to India, how Infusion closed India, and then how we came to Poland. Because I think that story nicely sums up, probably kind of one of the big final lessons that I'll share with you. In 2003. Our business was just getting up off the ground. The dot-com bubble had burst, and everybody was kind of recovering from it. And one of our big clients were the banks. And our biggest client by far was a company called Lehman Brothers, which is no longer. But at the time, it was one of the biggest fixed income trading shops on Wall Street. And at the time, we were still a young company. They probably accounted for 70 or 80% of our business. So the banks were still hurting from the dot-com burst. But during the dot-com boom, they'd gotten used to the productivity that technology was adding to their business. And so we had a number of consultants at Lehman, and one day their CIO held a town hall. And he stood in front of all of his employees and all of his consultants, and he said, I want to announce to everybody that we are going to be moving a significant part of our IT operations and software development to India. And we have signed partnerships with 2 firms, one called Wipro and one called Tata, and we're going to have strategic partnerships with them. And our goal is to move about 1/3 of our work by the end of the year from New York to India. But for all of you that are full-time employees, don't worry. I'm going to do everything I can to preserve your jobs, and we will cut consultants first. Right? So our consultants come back from work, and they're just like, we just had a town hall where the CIO basically said he's being mandated to cut us and to move our jobs to India. And so imagine as a business owner, you're sitting back and your biggest client has just told you that he's being mandated to move all of your work to India. And so it was one of those moments, when you start a business, you have existential moments where you're like, oh, this could be the end of our business, right? Like right now, like if he decides to shut all of our work down, we're down to, being a very, very, very small company. And so we did what you do. We went to our highest stakeholders at Lehman Brothers, and keep in mind, we were still a relatively small company and we're a relatively small part of their spend. And we said, hey, what's up with that? What's up with, is our business really is there a risk around it? And he said, yeah, there is. He said, I love working with you. And so we said, okay, well, what if we went to India? Could you still work with us? And he said, look, if you went to India, I could proportionally, the amount of work I'm giving you now, I could still give you in India. So we said, okay, I guess we're going to India. And so we jumped on a plane and went to India and set up an office. Now it took some time, right? Because it took us time, it took Wipro time, it took Tata time. So the other big trend that was happening at Lehman at the time was they wanted to take the risk off their books of doing these projects. So their goal was to send projects to India. So in the meantime, while India was getting set up, they started sending projects to our Canadian office. So we went to India, we set up India, we rented a nice office in Bangalore, and it was a frickin' disaster. We went to India, we would hire people, they wouldn't show up on the first day of work. We flew people from India to Toronto to get ramped up. We'd get calls when we thought they were on the plane, and someone would talk about their sister's wedding being canceled, so they couldn't make the flight. And it was a crazy place. And what we learned was it was such a hot labor market in India that people, you'd offer them a job that was paying them, I don't know, 10, 20% more than their previous job. They'd take 30 days notice and they'd go shop it around, and they wouldn't show up to work. And the average time people were staying in their jobs was 6 months. And then on top of that, the big trend in the market at the time was this certification called CMM. So we tried to hire people with CMM designations, but all CMM was a very orderly process to walk requirements through development. So we hired a team that really wasn't that flexible, yet the work coming to us from our clients, the requirements were always ill-defined and everything. So after a year, we basically said, we're taking all the work we're doing in India and we're just moving it to Canada, and even if we lose money on it, it's better to do that than to sacrifice quality. So we shut our Indian office down. Thankfully, for the type of work we were doing, Lehman was failing everywhere in India. Like, it wasn't just us and everything. And so we shut it down, and we vowed never to do work in India again. And actually, we vowed never to do work offshore again. We said, that's just not for us. That's not our model. We're better at just doing things locally and everything. And that should have been the end of that and everything. Fast forward about, I guess, 7, 8 years, and our business was really growing. And we relied on Canada a lot to do our work for the US, but the Canadian dollar had gone up. The Canadian market had started booming, so a lot of our Canadian consultants were doing work for Canadian clients. And we were having trouble winning competitive deals because our cost structure was really high, right? High Canadian dollar, high US labor force. And we came to this conclusion that we needed to set something up somewhere else. And so we'd kind of come to this conclusion, this openness that, okay, maybe we'll try it and we'll do it differently. And by then, our view on India had matured a little bit. Our view on India was, not that offshore doesn't work for Infusion or doing work off-site, it was that we realized that what made us strong as a business, if you think of those earlier lessons that I shared, what made us strong is we hired people with attitude and aptitude and treated them as partners, right? We hired people that valued innovation. What we realized is that when we were hiring in India, we had no advantage compared to other firms in getting the best talent. Our message didn't resonate in India, right? India at the time, and I haven't done work there, at the time, what India valued was working. If you work at a small American brand, you want to work for a big American brand. So they valued brand prestige, right? And there was a lot of turnover in the market there. We didn't have a chance at getting the best talent there because we were a no-name, right? Everybody would rather go work for Accenture, Deloitte, or IBM or Microsoft than work for an Infusion. So we were just a step along the ladder. And so we said, okay, we're going to look at things differently. We're not going to look for the cheapest place. We're going to look for a place where our brand and our message resonates with people, and we're going to go look for a place where people really value innovation. And so we created a matrix, and we evaluated all the countries in the world for different criteria. And Poland came on top. And I think 2 or 3 cities came up, but Warsaw and Krakow were two of the cities that came up. Oh, I'm way over time. Okay, last story, really quick. I'll wrap this up quickly. Warsaw and Krakow came up on top. So my preference was actually to go to Warsaw. It had an international airport. It was easy to get to and everything. So I went to Warsaw, and I had a meeting with someone from Microsoft, and I shared this with some of our team. And the meeting was at 5 p.m. And I sat in the lobby of the building at 5 p.m. Waiting for it to be called up for the meeting. And at 5 p.m. the elevator doors opened, and people started pouring out of the building. And the elevator would close, and 30 seconds later it would open, and it felt like someone had pulled the fire alarm. But it was 5 p.m. Everybody was going home, and I was like, wow, this is not what we're used to. Like, not that people work till midnight, but really, like, it seemed like people were sitting at their desk just ready to run. And then I went up and I met the individual from Microsoft, who was very annoyed that I was meeting with him, and I was like, he's like, you didn't send me an agenda ahead of time. I'd really I'd have liked to have gotten your slides ahead of time. Very structured. And I was like, oh, I don't know if this is the place for us. And then I came to Krakow, and it was a totally different story. We met someone who, I don't know if he's in this room. He never ended up working for Infusion. His name was Shimon. He was very involved in the development community. We told him what we were looking to do. And we had lunch with him in the square in Krakow, and he spent the next hour grilling me. He basically said, hey, I do contract work for the US, so I'm not looking for a job. But he's like, I have a lot of friends. I have a lot of like-minded individuals. They want to do cool work. They want to be part of building something. And there's a lot of companies that come to Poland, and they don't treat our developers well. They give us all the back office work. They don't treat us like first-class citizens. How are you guys going to be different? And he didn't ask me about wages. He didn't ask me about hours. He grilled me on the work. He grilled me on the roles. He grilled me on the technologies. He grilled me on the openness. And I loved it. And I left that meeting, and I was like, we're setting up in Krakow. And we hired, we have 250 people in Poland right now. And every single one of them is absolutely brilliant. And every single one of them is a huge pain in the ass in a good way. The amount of change that our business has gone through. So we've grown as a business, we've served clients well, we've done all those basic things. But our Polish team has forced us to change our business. They've forced us to re-examine how we do software development. They've forced us, their feedback to us was, you guys are too project management focused in development, not developer focused enough. We changed how we do development. We're using the wrong tools. It's been a tremendous instrument of change in our business and forward. So the final lesson that I'll share with you, and then I'll get off the stage, is you're only going to succeed in business if you're true to your culture and values. When we went to India, we were going because a client and a cost structure and a this and a that. When we came to Poland, we led with culture and values. We led with fit, and that made a big difference. And then finally, going back to the first story I told, we were open to letting people change us. We weren't rigid in our ideas. If we were doing something wrong, not that we didn't challenge or push back, but we were open to being wrong and letting smarter people lead us. So it's a little bit of our journey, a little bit of my journey. We've taken the company to Avanade, and we're looking to be a tremendous instrument of change in Avanade, and I hope to be able to come back maybe in another couple of conferences and share some new lessons. But it's been a good journey, and I've had a lot of fun chatting with you guys. Thank you. Sorry.